The great hall of the alien empire was filled with light and sound. Tall pillars stretched high into the sky, carved with symbols of victories from wars long past. Strange creatures from many worlds stood inside, their eyes glowing, their voices sharp. At the center sat the High Council, rulers of the empire. They were proud, arrogant, and cruel. On that day they gathered for a celebration. They had defeated another enemy, and as a show of power, they invited human ambassadors. The humans were new to space, weak in technology, and not respected by the alien races. Most aliens laughed when they saw humans, calling them fragile, slow, and unimportant. The High Council decided to play a cruel joke. They whispered to one another, their voices full of mockery. "Let us give them a gift that will remind them of their weakness. A human woman dressed like a servant. Let us see how they carry this insult." The hall grew silent when the guards brought her in. She was young, with dark hair and steady eyes. She wore simple clothes, nothing like the shining armor or royal robes of the aliens. She looked small compared to the giant forms around her, but she did not shake, did not bow too deeply. She walked with calm steps, and when she stood before the council, she lifted her head and looked at them without fear. "This is our gift," the High Speaker said loudly, his voice echoing. "A human woman, chosen from your kind, weak, soft, and helpless. We give her to you as a sign of our generosity." The aliens laughed. Some struck the floor with their staffs. Others shouted insults. "A pet for the humans, a toy for their halls." The laughter was cruel, sharp, endless. The human ambassadors felt shame burn in their hearts, but they could not refuse. To reject the gift would insult the empire. And so they nodded politely and accepted the woman. One ambassador stepped forward and took her hand, guiding her away while the laughter followed them like a storm. But as the woman left the hall, something strange happened. She did not lower her eyes in shame. Instead, she smiled, a small secret smile as if she carried a hidden truth. That night, the humans spoke quietly in their quarters. "Why her?" one asked. "Why did they choose this woman? She is no soldier, no leader." "Perhaps they chose her because she looks harmless," another answered bitterly. "They want to humiliate us." But the woman, Elena, sat silently in the corner. Her eyes were calm, her hands folded on her lap. At last, she spoke. "They think I am weak. They think I am a joke. Let them believe it. Their laughter blinds them. What they see as weakness may one day become strength." The others looked at her surprised. They expected tears or anger, but she showed none. Instead, she seemed almost at peace. The next morning, she was taken to the alien palace. The corridors were filled with light from strange crystals. Servants moved quickly, avoiding her gaze. Guards smirked when they saw her, whispering to one another. "She will not last a week," one said. "She will cry for home," another added. But Elena heard their words and did not respond. She studied the halls, the guards, the servants. She noticed where the shadows fell, where the doors opened, where the guards stood at different hours. She was watching, learning. The council had given her as a joke, but she did not behave like one. At a banquet that evening, she was presented to the alien princes. The young heirs laughed when they saw her. "This is the human woman," one prince said loudly. "She is smaller than a child of our kind. Will she even survive a single season in our world?" The others laughed, but one prince did not. He sat quietly, his sharp eyes fixed on Elena. Unlike the others, he did not laugh, did not mock. He seemed curious. Elena met his eyes for only a second, then lowered her gaze politely. But in that second, something passed between them, something the others did not see. The night grew late. Elena was sent to her chamber, small and simple, guarded by 2 soldiers who laughed outside her door. She sat by the window, looking at the stars. "They gave me as a joke," she whispered softly to herself. "But they do not know me. They do not see the fire that hides inside." The stars burned above, countless and endless. She watched them with calm determination. And so the story began. A human woman, handed over as a joke, mocked by the powerful, underestimated by all. But while the council laughed, she was waiting, watching, and planning. No one in that great hall knew it yet, but the gift they gave in mockery would one day change the empire forever. The palace of the alien empire was a maze of shining corridors and towering walls. Strange lights floated in the air, glowing like captured stars. The floors were smooth as glass, the ceilings painted with scenes of battles that humans could not imagine. Every corner whispered with voices, every shadow seemed to watch. Elena walked these halls like a ghost among giants. The aliens towered above her, tall, elegant, and proud. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, their skin shimmered with strange colors. When she passed, they whispered and laughed. She does not belong here. Look at her small hands, her weak steps. A pet for the humans, nothing more. The servants laughed behind their hands. The guards smirked openly. Even the palace children pointed at her as though she were an animal in a cage. But Elena did not answer. She did not argue. She listened. She watched. At night, when the palace grew quiet, Elena sat by her small window and studied the city below. Towers rose high into the clouds, glowing with alien fire. Ships moved across the sky like birds of metal. The streets below were filled with traders, servants, and soldiers, each speaking in sharp voices she was slowly learning to understand. She whispered to herself, "They think I am weak. That is their mistake. They do not know how humans survive. They do not know what patience can do." Days turned into weeks. Elena was given simple tasks in the palace: pouring wine, carrying scrolls, arranging flowers for the royal tables. They thought these duties would humiliate her, but she accepted each one with calm grace. The servants grew annoyed. They wanted her to break, to cry, to show weakness, but she never did. Instead, she asked quiet questions. "Why do the guards change at this hour?" she asked one servant. "Why are the windows of the council chamber always closed?" she asked another. They laughed at her curiosity, but they still answered. Piece by piece, Elena was building a map in her mind, not of stone and walls, but of secrets. One evening, as she placed golden cups before the royal family, she heard them speaking. The alien princes laughed loudly, telling stories of battles. But one voice was different. It was the youngest prince, quiet, thoughtful. He watched Elena as she worked. Unlike the others, he did not call her weak. He did not laugh when she bowed. Later, when the hall grew empty, he spoke to her. His voice was low, careful, as if he feared being overheard. "Human," he said, "you do not tremble. Why?" Elena met his gaze calmly. "Because trembling does not help me survive." The prince tilted his head, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Clear, direct, without fear. He said nothing more that night, but his eyes followed her as she left the hall. The days grew colder, and the whispers grew louder. She is close to the young prince. He watches her when he should not. Perhaps the human woman has bewitched him. Jealousy filled the palace. Some servants spat in her food when they thought she was not looking. Others placed sharp stones in her shoes. Elena never complained. She endured in silence. Her silence made her stronger, and slowly it began to unsettle those who mocked her. One night, Elena was walking back to Tsartsawal, her chamber, when she passed a group of guards. They laughed loudly, calling her names. One reached out and tried to push her. She did not stumble. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on his. "Do you think I am afraid?" she asked softly. The guard froze, unsettled by her calmness. The others laughed, but their laughter was uneasy. Something in her voice made them step back. From the shadows, someone else was watching. The young prince. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. Later, in a quiet garden filled with glowing flowers, the prince approached her again. "You are not like the others of your kind," he said. Elena answered, "Perhaps you are not like the others of yours." For the first time, he smiled. It was a small smile, almost hidden, but it was there. In that moment, something passed between them, an unspoken bond, fragile but real. Still, danger was growing. The council began to notice the prince's curiosity. They whispered in secret meetings. "The boy grows too close to the human. She must be removed before she poisons him with her weakness." But the boy did not see weakness. He saw fire in her calm words, strength in her silence. He began to ask her questions about humans, about Earth, about survival, about hope, and her answers changed him. Elena's place in the palace was no longer invisible. Some feared her, some hated her, and some, quietly, began to respect her. She had entered the empire as a joke, given as a gift of mockery, but now, slowly, silently, she was becoming something else. The alien empire did not know it yet, but the human woman they laughed at was beginning to bend the future of their throne. The palace gardens were a place of beauty and danger. Trees from many worlds stretched toward the sky, their leaves glowing like fireflies. Flowers opened with light instead of scent. Streams of silver water whispered across black stone. And it was here, among this quiet beauty, that Elena often walked in the evenings. The palace believed she walked there because she was lonely. They thought she wandered like a lost pet, but in truth, Elena was listening. Servants whispered near the fountains. Guards spoke when they thought no one cared. Secrets floated in the air like pollen, and she collected them all. It was one evening, beneath a tree with shining blue leaves, that the young prince approached her again. His steps were quiet, his robe brushing against the grass. Elena did not bow this time. She turned her head and looked at him calmly. "You should not be alone here," he said. His voice was low, cautious. "There are those who wish you gone." "And yet here I am," she replied. Her voice was steady. "I cannot live in fear. Fear is a chain, and I will not wear it." The prince studied her face. He had seen fear in many: warriors before battle, servants before punishment, even noble lords before the council. But this human woman, small and fragile by the measure of his people, showed none. "You are strange," he said softly. "Strange, but interesting." Days passed, and their meetings grew more frequent. At first, it was small things: a glance across the hall, a single word exchanged, then quiet conversations in shadowed corridors, in hidden corners of the garden, in empty rooms where only dust listened. The prince asked questions, many questions. Why do your people fight when they are weak? Why do they reach for the stars when they cannot even master their own world? Why do you endure humiliation without anger? Elena's answers were simple, but each carried weight. Because the weak must fight hardest to survive. Because the stars give us hope, even when the ground breaks beneath us. Because anger feeds the enemy more than it feeds the heart. The prince listened, and slowly, her words changed the way he thought. But not everyone was blind to their bond. Servants began to whisper. Guards began to watch more closely. Jealous eyes followed them. "She has trapped him," one muttered. "She poisons his mind with human tricks," another sneered. "She must be silenced," hissed a third. The council grew restless. The young prince was heir to power, and now he gave his attention to a human woman. To them, it was shameful, dangerous, a threat. One night, the prince came to Elena in anger. His eyes glowed in the torchlight, his hands clenched. "They mock me," he said. "They laugh in secret halls. They say I am weak because I listen to you." Elena looked at him without fear. "Do you care for their laughter?" "They are powerful," he said. "One day I must rule them." "Then rule them," she answered calmly. "But rule with strength they do not understand. They know power of blade and voice. Show them power of mind. Show them that listening is stronger than shouting." The prince fell silent. Her words sank deep into him, like seeds into the soil. He understood, though he did not yet admit it. The bond between them grew, not in fire, but in quiet sparks. Elena did not flatter him. She did not bow to him. She spoke to him as if he were simply another person, not a prince, not an heir. No one had ever done that. And in return, he gave her something she had not known in the palace: respect. One evening, when the stars shone bright above the palace towers, the prince and Elena sat together in the garden. The air was cool, the flowers glowing faintly. "You do not fear me," he said. "Why should I fear you?" she replied. "I am heir to the throne of this empire, and I am a woman given as a joke," she said softly. "Yet here we are, speaking as equals." The prince smiled, only slightly, but it was real. But danger was not far. A group of nobles, jealous and angry, began to plot. "The boy is too close to the human," one said. "She clouds his mind," said another. "If she is not removed, he may choose her above us all." Their whispers were sharp, their eyes cold. Plans formed in the shadows, and though Elena did not yet know it, her bond with the prince had already placed a target upon her back. Yet in that moment, under the stars, she felt no fear. She looked at the young prince, and he looked back, and something silent but unbreakable grew between them. It was not yet love, not yet loyalty, but it was something that could become both. It was trust, rare and dangerous. And trust, in the empire of lies and cruelty, was more powerful than any blade. The alien empire still believed she was nothing more than a gift, a joke, a weak human. But the unexpected bond forming in the shadows of the palace was the first crack in their certainty. And through that crack, the future was beginning to break free. The palace was no longer quiet for Elena. What once were whispers behind her back now became open hostility. Servants stared at her with narrowed eyes. Guards smirked when she walked past. And in the shadows, nobles gathered in secret, speaking her name like poison. "She must be removed," one whispered. "She grows too close to the prince," said another. "If he chooses her, our power is lost," a third hissed. They believed she was still weak, still only human. But they also feared something they could not explain. Why did the prince listen to her? Why did he defend her? Why did he seem stronger with her near? Fear turned to anger. Anger turned to plans. Elena felt the change around her. The air of the palace grew heavy, like a storm building in the sky. She was not blind to the glances, the whispers, the footsteps that followed her too closely. One evening, as she left the gardens, she saw shadows moving where none should be. The feeling of being hunted wrapped around her like a cold cloak. But instead of fear, she grew sharper. She began to prepare. Her chamber was small, with nothing but a bed and a sin table. Yet with clever hands, she turned it into a place of defense. She placed shards of broken pottery near the door, hidden under rugs. She tied threads from her dress across the window frame, thin, invisible, but enough to signal if someone tried to enter. She placed a jug of water where she could use it as a weapon if needed. The palace believed she was helpless, but Elena had grown on Earth, where survival often belonged to those who used their minds, not their strength. The attack came sooner than she expected. It was deep in the night when the guards outside her chamber disappeared. Their laughter, always present, was gone. The silence was louder than any sound. Elena sat awake, waiting. She had learned to sleep lightly, like a soldier. When the door creaked open, she was already moving. Dark figures slipped inside, cloaked in black, knives glinting faintly. Assassins. One stepped on the rug and hissed in pain. The shards cut through his feet. Another brushed the thread at the window, snapping it. Elena knew now she was surrounded. But she did not scream. She grabbed the jug of water and threw it at the first assassin's face. The jug shattered, and water blinded his glowing eyes. In the confusion, she struck him with the broken handle, sharp like a blade. The others moved quickly, but Elena slipped into the shadows of her small chamber. They were larger, faster, stronger, but they were not patient. She had patience. She had traps. A second assassin tripped on the broken pieces she had scattered. He fell hard, knife clattering against the floor. She kicked it away, her heart racing but her hands steady. At that moment, the door burst open with a roar of anger. The young prince stood there, his eyes blazing, his blade drawn. He had heard the silence, the missing guards, and had come. What he saw froze him for a breath. Elena, standing tall in the middle of the chaos, blood on her hand, shards of pottery around her, assassins stumbling in confusion. She was not the helpless woman they thought she was. She was a fighter, not with strength, but with mind, with courage, with unbreakable will. The prince struck like a storm. His blade flashed, and two assassins fell before they could rise again. The others fled into the shadows, melting away like smoke. When the chamber was silent once more, the prince looked at Elena. "You fought them," he said, his voice low, almost unbelieving. "I had no choice," she answered calmly. "You had every choice to scream, to beg, to wait for rescue, but you did not." Elena met his gaze. "Because no one saves those who wait. I have learned that much." The prince felt a strange fire rise within him. Not anger, not pity, but respect. For the first time, he saw her not as a human, not as a woman given as a joke, but as something more. The council heard of the attack the next day, though no assassin was captured. They spoke of criminals and unrest, but in truth, everyone knew. It had been nobles. It had been those who hated her. The prince stood before them and declared, "She is not weak. She is stronger than you believe. If you strike at her again, you strike at me." The council erupted in outrage. How could the heir protect a human? How could he shame the throne by defending her? But the people outside the palace whispered differently. They tried to kill the human woman, and she lived. She fought back. She outwitted them. Perhaps humans are not as weak as we thought. That night, alone in her chamber, Elena cleaned the blood from her hands. She stared at the stars beyond the window, her face calm but her mind sharp. "They wanted me gone," she whispered, "but I remain. They think they frighten me. They do not see the truth. The storm has only begun." And in the silence of that night, the empire itself seemed to tremble. The palace no longer looked at Elena as a shadow. After the failed attack, she was no longer invisible. Every servant's glance was set. Harper, every noble's smile carried hidden teeth. She had survived what was meant to silence her, and survival itself was dangerous. But the greatest danger came not from knives in the dark. It came from whispers in daylight. The council gathered often, their voices sharp as blades. "The boy protects her," one counselor said. "He listens to her," another growled. "If he continues, he will shame the throne itself," hissed a third. They wanted her gone, yet they could not touch her openly now. Too many had heard the story of her survival. The common people whispered it like a tale of old, the human woman who fought assassins with nothing but her hands. To kill her now would risk turning whispers into fire. The young prince grew bolder after that night. He no longer hid his meetings with Elena. He spoke to her in open halls, in gardens, even before servants. When counselors asked why, he answered, "Because she speaks truth when others speak lies. Because she gives me wisdom when others give me flattery." The counselors clenched their jaws, but could not silence him. One evening, under the glow of 1,000 hanging lanterns, the palace held a feast. Nobles from across the empire filled the hall with their shining robes and jeweled crowns. The music of alien instruments filled the air, and tables overflowed with food from conquered worlds. Elena was there, standing quietly at the edge, carrying wine as she always did. But this night would not be like others. The prince stood suddenly, raising his cup. His voice rang out across the hall. "You mock her," he said. "You whisper against her. But this woman has shown more courage than many of you who wear crowns." The hall froze. The counselors turned pale with anger. The nobles muttered like a nest of snakes. "She is nothing," one lord shouted. "She is human," spat another. "She is a joke that went too far." The prince's eyes burned. "Then hear this truth. She carries my heir." The hall erupted. Some gasped in shock. Others shouted in rage. The music died. The laughter vanished. And the Heir itself seemed to stop breathing. Elena stood still, her face calm, but inside her heart pounded like thunder. The secret was no longer secret. She felt every gaze burn into her skin: anger, disbelief, fear. The council struck their staffs against the floor. "This is treason," one cried. "It is corruption of blood," another screamed. "The child must not live," thundered the high speaker. The prince raised his hand. His voice cut through the chaos. "If you harm her, if you harm our child, you will make an enemy of me, and I am heir to the throne." Silence fell again. The nobles stared, trapped between fury and fear. For the first time, the boy they mocked for his quiet nature stood against them, and he did not stand alone. He stood with her. That night, the palace was alive with argument. Some demanded her death. Others warned that killing her now would spark rebellion. Servants whispered that perhaps this was fate, that the empire, proud and arrogant, would now be bound to humans through blood. In her chamber, Elena sat by the window, her hands resting on her stomach. The stars above glowed faintly, distant but eternal. She whispered softly, "They gave me as a joke. Now I carry the future they fear." Her calmness was not weakness, it was defiance. The next day, the council summoned her to stand before them. The great hall was filled with nobles, guards, and servants. All eyes turned to her as she walked forward. She stood alone in the center, small and human, while the council towered above her. The high speaker's voice was like thunder. "You do not belong here. You were given as mockery, nothing more. Now you threaten the bloodline of the empire. Why should we allow you to live?" The hall waited for her fear. They expected trembling knees, broken words, tears. But Elena lifted her head and spoke with a voice steady as stone. "You may laugh at humans. You may call us weak, but you forget one truth. Weakness survives where strength destroys itself. You fear me because I have no army, no crown, no blade, yet still, I stand here, alive, when you tried to end me, and now, within me, I carry the future you cannot control." Her words echoed through the hall. Some sneered, some shouted, but many, in silence, felt the weight of her truth. The council was forced to vote. Rage burned in their eyes, but fear tied their hands. To kill her might spark chaos. To accept her would stain their pride. When the count was finished, the hall shook with disbelief. By the smallest margin, the vote passed. She would live, and her child would be recognized as heir. The decision was law. The hall erupted again, half in outrage, half in stunned silence. The prince walked to her side and took her hand before all. Together, they faced the storm. That night, the empire whispered a new name for her: Mother of the Future. What began as a cruel joke had become the turning point of history. But in the shadows behind jeweled curtains and closed doors, enemies sharpened their blades. The storm was far from over. The decision of the council spread like fire through the empire. A human woman, once mocked as a gift, had been declared the mother of the future heir. It was unthinkable. Some whispered it in shock, others in anger, and some in secret hope. The palace was no longer only stone and silence. It was now a battlefield, not of blades but of words. Nobles held secret gatherings. "This cannot be allowed," one snarled. "The bloodline must remain pure," another growled. "If the child is born, it will weaken us forever," hissed a third. But outside the golden walls, the common people spoke differently. They had little love for the council's pride and cruelty. To them, the story of the human woman was a tale of survival, of courage, of change. "If she can stand against them, perhaps there is hope for us," a merchant whispered. "She carries the air, she carries the future," said a soldier. The empire itself was spontane, litting, half in hatred, half in awe. Elena walked through this storm with quiet grace. She knew every glance could be an arrow, every whisper a dagger, yet she did not hide. She moved through the palace with steady steps, head high, eyes calm. The prince stayed close to her. His presence was protection, but it was also fuel for the fire. For every step he took beside her, the council's anger grew. One day, the high speaker summoned her again. The great hall was filled with counselors, nobles, and soldiers. The air was heavy with tension. "You sow division in this empire," the high speaker declared, his voice echoing like thunder. "You turn brother against brother, house against house. You have no crown, no blood of our kind. What gives you the right to stand before us?" Elena's voice was calm, but it carried across the hall like steel. "I did not ask to stand here. You placed me here when you mocked me, when you gave me away as a joke. But now I carry a life that belongs not only to me, but to your future. You may hate me, but you cannot erase me." Her words cut deeper than any sword. Some counselors shouted in rage. Others sat in silence, their eyes dark with thought. The days that followed grew heavier. Riots broke out in distant cities. Some demanded her death. Others carried banners with her name painted across them in human letters. The empire had never been so divided. And Elena, once a servant in their eyes, now became the center of it all. In the palace, enemies moved more boldly. Servants placed poison in her cups, though she noticed the bitter smell and refused to drink. Guards accidentally left doors unlatched, hoping assassins might slip inside. At night, she heard footsteps outside her chamber, waiting, listening. But each time, she survived. Each time, she stood taller. One evening, as the fires of unrest burned across the empire, the prince, he brought her to a high balcony overlooking the city. The towers glowed red in the dusk, and the streets below swelled with people shouting, singing, crying. "They do not know what to believe," he said. "Half of them call you a curse, half call you hope, and I fear I cannot hold them together." Elena placed her hand on his arm. "Then let them hear the truth. Not from the council, not from their nobles, but from us." "You would speak before them?" he asked. "I must," she said. "If they see me as weak, let them see my strength. If they see me as hope, let me give them reason. Words can wound, but they can also heal." The prince looked at her, his eyes full of doubt and fire. Then he nodded. The next day, the plaza before the palace filled with thousands. Citizens from every district gathered, their voices rising like waves. Soldiers lined the walls, their weapons ready. The council watched from high balconies, waiting for her to fail. Elena stepped forward. She was small compared to the guards around her, fragile against the towering walls. Yet when she spoke, her voice carried through the silence. "I was given to you as a joke. They laughed at me. They said I was weak. Perhaps I am. But weakness is not shame. It is the seed of strength. Humans have always been called fragile, yet we survived storms, wars, hunger, and now I stand here alive, though many tried to end me. You fear my child. But a child is not fear. A child is a beginning. You can hate me, but the future grows despite your hatred. The question is not whether I belong to this empire. The question is whether this empire is strong enough to accept what is already here." Her words fell like stones into water, sending ripples through the crowd. Some shouted in anger, others cheered. Many stood silent, their eyes uncertain, their hearts shaken. That night the council seethed. "She turns the people against us," one hissed. "No," another said darkly. "She turns them against fear itself. That is worse." They knew now that killing her would not silence the storm. It would make her legend grow. Alone in her chamber, Elena sat by the window once more. She touched her stomach gently and whispered to the stars. "They think this is war between me and them, but it is not. This is a war of voices, of hearts, of belief, and I will not let them win." The storm outside had grown into war, but Elena was ready. The empire was no longer the same. Whispers of rebellion drifted through the streets. Some shouted her name as a curse, others sang it as hope. And at the center of it all stood Elena, the human woman who had once been nothing but a cruel joke. The palace walls shook with tension. Nobles plotted in secret chambers. Servants carried rumors like weapons. The council argued until their voices cracked. But no matter what they said, no matter what schemes they built, One truth remained. Elena lived, and she carried the heir. The prince guarded her more closely than ever. He walked beside her in the halls, sat with her in the gardens, and stood with her before the council. His quiet strength had sharpened into defiance. No longer did he hide his respect for her. No longer did he allow mockery to pass. Yet with each step, their enemies grew more desperate. One night, as storms raged across the skies, the council gathered in secret. "She must be destroyed before the child is born," one whispered. "If we strike now, the people will riot," another warned. "Then let it be war," hissed the high speaker. "Better war than a throne ruled by human blood." Their decision was clear. They would not wait. But Elena was not blind. She felt the danger in every glance, every silence. She knew the storm was reaching its breaking point. And she also knew this: survival was no longer only about her. It was about the child within her, the child who carried the future of the empire. The attack came at dawn. Shadows filled the palace, cloaked assassins sly. Peeping past guards who had been bribed or silenced, doors burst open, blades flashed in the dim light. Elena stood ready. She was not a warrior, not in body, but her mind was sharp as ever. She guided the prince through secret paths she had mapped in her silent walks. She used the very palace that mocked her as a weapon against those who hunted her. By the time the sun rose, the floors were stained with blood, not hers, not the prince's. The assassins lay broken, their plot failed. But the war was no longer hidden, it was open. The empire erupted, cities burned with protest. Armies began to march, not against foreign enemies but against each other. Some fought for the council, others swore loyalty to the prince, and through him, to Elena. The throne of the empire trembled. In the midst of chaos, Elena stood before the people once more. The plaza was filled with thousands, their voices a storm of anger, fear, and hope. The air itself shook with tension. Soldiers lined the walls, blades ready. Elena stepped forward, her figure small against the towering palace, but her voice carried like thunder. "You call me weak. You call me unworthy. Perhaps you are right. I was given as a joke, a gift meant to humiliate. Yet still, I am here. I did not bow. I did not break. And now, within me, grows the future of this empire." You fear the child, but the child is not fear. It is unity, a bridge between worlds, a chance for something greater than arrogance and cruelty. You may hate me, but you cannot stop what is already coming. I am not here because I chose power. I am here because power chose me, through your own laughter, through your own cruelty. And now you must live with the future you tried to mock. Her words fell heavy upon the crowd, and for the first time the storm quieted. Not all were convinced, not all were loyal, but doubt had broken into the council's certainty. That night the council gathered once more, but their voices were no longer united. Some still demanded her death, others, shaken by the people's silence, urged cautio. And the empire was no longer theirs to control. It was slipping, piece by piece, into the hands of the woman they once called weak. Months later, as winter winds howled across the empire, Elena gave birth. The child was small, fragile, but his cry carried through the halls like a declaration. The nobles came in silence, forced to bow. The council, bitter and broken, had no choice but to recognize him. The people outside the palace lit fires of celebration, their voices rising into the night. The future heir had been born. Elena lay in her chamber, the child resting against her chest. The prince sat beside her, his eyes filled with fire and pride. "They gave you as a joke," he whispered. "Now you are the mother of the empire." Elena looked down at the child, her expression calm but fierce. "They still hate me. They will still try to destroy me. Then we will fight them together," he said. "No," Elena replied softly, her eyes fixed on the child. "Not with blades, not with fear. We will fight them with what they fear most, hope." Outside, the storm of war had not ended. Enemies still plotted, blades were still sharpened, the empire was not yet safe. But within those walls, something had changed forever. A human woman, once mocked, once treated as nothing, had become the mother of the future heir, and the empire, whether it wished it or not, would never be the same again.